Shadow Treasurer Joe Hockey is also in our Parliament House studio. Joe Hockey, welcome to breakfast.
Good morning, Fran.
Joe Hockey, it's 1 year on from the collapse of Lehman Brothers. No one really thought we'd be talking about economic recovery and markets rebounding so soon. Is it time for you to admit that the Rudd government's strategy to go early, go hard, go households has worked?
Well, Fran, and I'm sure you'll correct me if you think I'm wrong here, but I think there are 5 reasons why we've come through this better than many people expected. Firstly, we went into this downturn in far better shape, 4% unemployment, 4% economic growth, and around $45 billion of assets in the bank with no government debt. Secondly, we had no major financial collapses. Our financial system was extraordinarily well regulated as a result of the reforms we put in place in government. Thirdly, interest rates. In Australia, most people are actually on variable home loan rates. The Reserve Bank went very hard, 4.25% in the cash rate, and that was second only to New Zealand. Fourthly, Australia has had very good terms of trade. In fact, as of today, Fran, our terms of trade are more favourable to the Rudd government than the day we lost the election in 2007, and the flexible exchange rate going from parity to around 60 cents delivered a real benefit to Australia at a crucial time. And then the fifth point is a stimulus package, and that stimulus package, $106 billion in total. Now, I know the government announced $52 billion in stimulus, but it's also announced an extra over $42 billion of additional new expenditure since the 2008 budget. And our argument is 40% of that actually kicks in after the 1st of July next year.
Sure, let's not delve too much into that because some of that I think takes into pension increases. But
Fran, you've got to count that as part of your expenditure. I mean,
but that was a policy issue being talked about well before the stimulus spending.
Yeah, correct. But you know what, Fran? It is total government spending. So if it's pension increases, it's okay to go even further. I mean, this is the point. Every decision to cut back on expenditure is hard in government.
I think
every decision.
Okay, well, Wayne Swan, the Treasurer, says CEOs have told him they didn't order mass retrenchments in this country because they could see the government was prepared to do whatever it took to prevent a big increase in unemployment. Now we have today's news poll suggesting the majority of voters support the stimulus spending, want it to continue. You're out of step with business and the electorate, it would seem.
Well, we're not out of step with the best interests of the Australian people. And I tell you what, Fran, we are taking a leadership position on this. We believe the government is spending too much money and it's been wasteful in its expenditure. And I say to you, Kevin Rudd has waxed on about productivity for 2 years. What individual initiative out of all this money, what individual initiative is actually delivering productivity improvements for the long term? What is actually going to deliver the capacity for Australia to grow? You know, where are the big railway lines that they've talked about, or the massive expansion in ports, or where is the change in the fabric of the economy that is going to deliver a stronger economy into the long term?
Okay, well, it's not, as you'd understand, it's not my job to answer that. There is an infrastructure spending package, but that's not my job. One of the changes the government is making...
Well, hang on.
No, one of the reforms the government is making is the means testing of the private health insurance rebate, and you blocked that. That's a $1.9 billion hole in the budget, adding to the debt.
Well, sorry, Fran. I mean, let me just respond to what you said a little bit earlier about infrastructure. It's a very important point. During the 11 years of the Howard government, our GDP, our economy doubled in size. And the percentage spent on infrastructure not only doubled, it increased beyond that. So there has been massive infrastructure spending in the past. Kevin Rudd claimed that all the benefits of the mining boom were blown by the Howard government. Well, I say to you, what have we got for all the money that has been spent by the government, borrowed money? What have we got to show to the next generation of Australians for the debt that we are leaving them with? It's a very important point.
Yeah, I understand, maybe, but it's not mine to answer. If I can ask you about the Prime Minister's threat of an early election, setting up some kind of double dissolution trigger with this threat to recall Parliament to vote on the private health insurance bill, if they do bring that means testing legislation back in, will you let it through the second time rather than set up a possible double dissolution trigger?
Well, Fran, let me say to you, Kevin Rudd promised before the last election not to touch private health insurance. He not only touched it in his first budget, when there was no global financial crisis, he's gone after it aggressively in his second budget. The Liberal Party stands for choice in health. That's what we believe in. We have opposed this measure because it is bad policy. It's going to put more pressure on the public hospitals that Kevin Rudd promised to fix. And our argument is you have to have choice in health. You have to have people investing in their own health care, or else you are going to have a greater burden on the public hospital system, one that the nation cannot afford.
So if they do bring it in before Christmas again, what will you do? Will you vote it down again?
Fran, our position is that the bill is bad legislation. And you know what? It wasn't just us. It was the Greens, it was the two independents that said it as well. It's bad legislation. And quite frankly, the Labor Party is more focused on the next election than they are on good policy. And I would just say to Mr Rudd, please put the interests of the nation ahead of your own political interests.
Okay.
Please focus on fixing up the hospital system, not destroying it by destroying private health insurance.
So you keep voting it down?
Fran, I said that. We will continue to fight against bad legislation.
It's 13 minutes to 8. Our guest this morning in the Parliament House studio is Shadow Treasurer Joe Hockey. Joe Hockey, over the weekend, Malcolm Turnbull refused to rule out bringing back individual contracts. What is the coalition policy? Are AWAs in or out?
Well, Fran, AWAs are dead, but the government themselves have allowed for individual contracts, and that started on the 1st of July. What Malcolm Turnbull said was, we're going to look at that, as we should, and if there's a way to improve productivity, and if those contracts aren't working, then we reserve the right to go to the election with an IR policy that is going to build productivity, deliver higher real wages and more jobs.
So does that mean an IR policy that could contain the equivalent of Australian workplace agreements?
Well, let me tell you, the government's own laws have adopted large chunks of work choices. And quite frankly, this is just a distraction again by the Labor Party from the focus on their reckless spending. We are very focused on the government wasting money at the moment, as we should be. We've said we will monitor the government's changes to workplace relations. But if somehow people are suggesting that we should never stand up for small business in workplace relations, or we should never stand up for more jobs and higher wages, well, I'm sorry, we take a different view.
Joe Hockey, you stated very clearly last week that keeping interest rates down is more important at the moment than offsetting job losses. What does that say to the tens of thousands of workers who are feeling anxious that they could soon be chucked onto the dole queues?
Well, what will cause them to be, to use your words, chucked onto the dole queues is higher interest rates, Fran. There are small businesses that have employed the flexibility delivered by previous government's IR laws with job sharing, shift sharing, part-time work, casual work and so on. Small businesses, more than 2 million of them, that have gone out of their way to try and find an opportunity to keep their workers on the payroll. And Australians are working fewer hours per head of population, but overall, the unemployment rate has not risen to the Armageddon levels that the government predicted. Now, what is going to tip that? Well, I'll tell you what will tip it. Higher interest rates. And Wayne Swan has to explain to the Australian people how the government borrowing money and spending record levels of money is not going to put upward pressure on interest rates and lead to upward pressure on interest rates, particularly for small business that's struggling to keep workers.
Joe Hockey, thanks so much for joining us on Breakfast.
Thank you, Fran.
Joe Hockey is the Shadow Treasurer. It's 9 minutes to 8.